Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope we're doing well, and today I want to wish everyone a very merry and blessed Christmas. We are done with the Advent purple lighting as we are now with the bright white lighting of Christmas as we celebrate the birth of Christ. Remember that the 12 days of Christmas are the 12 days of Christmas and not before, no matter what ABC Family or Freeform or whatever it's called and all the other major news stations and TV stations try to tell you. Anyway, you will get the truth from me as always, not just with that, but also, of course, with the box office numbers as we had Avatar: The Way of Water topping $850 million worldwide, well below what some were projecting. I don't know who was out there. There were some people apparently saying the film was going to reach $1 billion by the end of the weekend. And immediately when I heard people saying that in the comment section, I thought to myself, I don't know what reporters out there are saying that, but they're gonna be crazy to say that. All right, even if the film didn't have the polar vortex going on in the United States, at best you're looking at maybe an extra 10, max 50 million added, so it still would not have reached $1 billion worldwide. The fact is, though, this film will eventually reach $1 billion, and so it's again one of those things with, okay, yeah, it didn't reach it this weekend, but it will indeed reach it in the weekends to come. But it does have an impact on just how strong this movie is going to be going forward, and will this film be able to perform to such a degree that it's going to be able to make its money back at the very least, according to the terms set by James Cameron. James Cameron himself saying the film needed to make $2 billion worldwide to break even. Well, we have some of the numbers. We have the projections, which if you've been following my charting, you know that my projections tend to be pretty on as far as my range is concerned. It's a pretty wide range, but it's very rare that films end up falling off of that range, whether as far as an under or over performance, it does happen. Obviously, there are exceptions, but it is not a common thing to happen. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the actual range for this film. And also, some of the other news here is one of my predictions coming true. Wakanda Forever has indeed reached $800 million. That means it's added another $25 million or so since the previous weekend. And interestingly enough, not a lot of that was coming from the domestic marketplace, a lot of that coming from international markets. So coming in as a much stronger international performer than I had initially thought, and also coming in a little bit below where I thought this film would be domestically. We'll talk a little bit more about what the potential domestic numbers are for that film, for Avatar, and for many other films, a plethora of other films, including some new releases as well. But before we're going any further into this box office breakdown, please make sure to smash that like button, that fire button if you're watching on Odyssey, smash the rumble button as well. Also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel on any of those platforms with a bell notification. That way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. Just make sure the notifications are on in either platform and whatever that platform might be. Well, let's start off with the headline from Deadline, as it says here from Nance. From good old Nance over at Deadline, it says, indeed, The Way of Water has topped $850 million worldwide, and also that Wakanda Forever has reached $800 million. It goes on to say, coming out of its second weekend, James Cameron's Avatar: Way of Water has banked an estimated $855.4 million globally through Sunday. I've been looking at some of the numbers at other sites like Box Office Mojo, and I believe that they had the numbers a little bit higher. Just keep in mind that these are sites that typically are taking different metrics in, but this is matching up perfectly with the site I typically use, the numbers, and so therefore, because I have two sources that are using the same numbers, I'm going with this specific number. So if anyone's wondering why it looks a little bit different on Box Office Mojo, just keep in mind, right, that those factors can sometimes come into play. Sometimes you do see corrections. I have seen a lot more corrections on Box Office Mojo's site than I have seen anywhere else. So again, if the numbers is being backed up by an article here from Deadline, I'm going to go with that. Again, obviously, I like to make fun of Deadline a lot, but it is, again, as far as the actual numbers and reporting are concerned, usually pretty accurate when it comes to that. So $855.5 or $0.4 million globally through Sunday is still pretty impressive. The sophomore session added $168.6 million internationally from 52 markets. Again, very impressive international release. This film is being already making $601 or roughly $602 million internationally in just 2 weeks. That's the reason why I think this film will probably end up reaching $1 billion internationally before the end of its run, and I don't think the film is going to be nearly as impressive of a domestic release compared to some of the other films to come out this year. It's still going to be one of the highest grossing domestic films of 2022, but I don't know if it's going to be able to catch up with the domestic numbers for a film like Top Gun Maverick or some of the other films that also perform well this year. It goes on to say, also overseas, 20th Century Studios' highly anticipated sequel past Doctor Strange, The Multiverse of Madness, and Minions: Rise of Gru to the number 3 biggest Hollywood grosser of 2022. It's also now number 5 studio title of the pandemic era. Don't you love always these titles that they make up for these films? In either case, Avatar: Way of Water is still doing pretty well. But how well is it actually doing? Well, let's go ahead and look at the actual numbers for the domestic weekend. As you can see, it only dropped 58% domestically from last weekend, and that is a pretty strong hold. Seeing that this was a weekend which saw the polar vortex, right, impact things, seeing that it was also Christmas Eve, Christmas Day on Sunday. This is a number I think some people probably expected to be higher, myself included. Box Office Pro, I believe, had their projections around 56% of a drop. So the fact that this movie is still dropping in that 60% range with all of those things going on does still show you that this film does have some strength, right, as far as the actual percentages are concerned. However, with all that being said, it has made $253 million domestically so far after 2 weeks. So again, very impressive numbers there, but is it going to be able to hold out to push it to a degree that's going to bring it up to the $700 or so million that was made by, I believe Top Gun Maverick was able to get up to that point domestically? I don't necessarily think so, but we of course will have to wait and see. There are still a lot of holiday road to run, as it were, for this movie, as well as the other films that are on this list. So there is plenty of room, plenty of time for this film to be able to run up the score domestically, internationally. But again, I'm just talking here about what the numbers that I'm seeing are, and also what I just expect to happen, especially based off of the mixed reaction for this movie, right? Some people might say, you say mixed reaction, but, you know, Rotten Tomatoes this and Cinema Score that. Well, remember, Rotten Tomatoes is a complete garbage website that has changed its system so many times, often for the protection of studios. And then when you look to things like CinemaScore, that thing has been so corrupt for years because they never release the actual data with any of their actual grades. They just give you the grade. And if we just break that down for a moment, we recognize, oh, they're only polling the people that are there opening night, the people who are more predisposed to give a positive rating for a movie. And so therefore, you know, it's again one of those things where it's hard to take those numbers in a positive light. Now, there are people who like this movie. There's no doubt about it. Jeremy at Geeks and Gamers, very much a big fan of this film. Chris Gore, also big fan of this movie as well. My good friend John the Flickinger is also a pretty big fan of this film, though his second viewing, he came out of it saying, you know what? I don't like this film nearly as much as I thought that I did. You know, he still loves the visuals and thinks that it's breathtaking, but he really thought the story was a lot more noticeable the second time around as being a very, very weak point, and that's something that's been consistently said by many people, even those who like the film in general. And at over a 3-hour runtime, that is going to have an impact down the line. How much of an impact, we'll have to wait and see once we get to the third week, fourth week, etc. again of this holiday season. Will it be able to run up the score, especially with January having pretty much no competition for it? Again, anything can happen at this point in time. Puss in Boots is a new release from Universal, $11.3 million in its opening weekend. With the budget for this movie being around $80 million, that puts it in a position where it's got to make quite a bit of money to break even. Now, it's also got the holiday season still, but $11.3 million, probably below what they were hoping for. $17.4 million is what it's made so far over the course of the holiday season. Whitney Houston's I Want to Dance with Somebody at $5.3 million. Babylon at $3.5 million. Both of these films cost around $45 to $55 million. And so still need to make a little bit of change, and not a very good and not a very strong start for these movies. So again, Babylon especially looks more like an Oscar bait film, as much as I like the director for the movie, as far as his first film Whiplash, which was fantastic. This film does not look nearly as good, and it looks like a lot of people are not really going to go and see it. Coming in the number 5 spot is Violent Night from Universal. I saw this movie this last weekend. I'm going to try and put a review out for this movie before I go on my little vacation with the family this week. There might be some days without videos, typical to what a normal week would be, but I do want to try and get at least a video or two with a couple of reviews out for films like Violent Night, and also I finally saw The Woman King. I saw it so that you don't have to, which was sent to me by Disney. So, you know, hey, it is what it is. But anyway, Violent Night specifically, got to see that in theaters, and I thought it was horrible. I thought it was terrible. I just thought the jokes were very predictable. I thought everything was like too campy. You know how there's that just the right amount of campiness where you're like, okay, they're having fun, I'm having fun. This is a movie where I was like, yeah, you know what? even if I did drink, I could see myself being like, what in the world? This thing is stupid. So anyway, some people might like it. I was not a fan. Black Panther Wakanda Forever, number 6 spot, making $3 million. So even though it started to be pulled from a lot of theaters, right, over 1,000 theaters, in fact, 7 weeks out from its initial release, only dropping 43% at another $3 million. So I think that this film, keep in mind, right, this film also had the same impact that all these other films have had, which is that this was the Christmas weekend, and also that we have to keep into account that there was indeed the polar vortex storm. So all of those things indeed could have impacted the numbers. So don't be surprised that this film is able to make just a little bit more money, even domestically over the course of the run. It's already hit $800 million worldwide. As I said weeks ago, I think 8 to 850 million is definitely the range for this movie, and I think that 450 to 500 million domestic is still a possibility, though again, every weekend that becomes a little less likely. At the very least, 430 is no question on the table. But again, we still have a long ways to go as far as the holiday weekend is concerned. The Menu, a film that I saw and did review for the channel, was a big fan of this movie. In fact, sadly dropping out of a lot of theaters 6 weeks out, not making a whole lot back this weekend domestically, still has about $7 million in the red for this movie. I highly recommend going to see this. I think that the holiday season is the best time to go see this movie because not a lot of people are going to be in there. I was, I think, the only person in the theater for this movie, so I ended up having just a good time in the theater by myself, and it was a very great thriller, very good thriller, and I thought that it did a very good job. You then have films like The Fabelmans, an Oscar bait type movie, again, still hanging around. Hard to really, again, determine the success of this film until we get the entire box office for it, especially as it's heading theaters randomly. Strange World continues to be a financial flop, especially as it is now available on Disney+. Devotion as well, huge drop-off here. They've given up on it completely, so this film's going to end up being a massive financial failure for Sony. And then, of course, you have some of the other films on this list. Banshees of Inisherin is available on HBO Max. Great film. Reviewed that film for the channel as well. So let's look at the international numbers here. Avatar: Way of Water, $855.3 million. So as you can see, massive difference here from the domestic and the international numbers. This is a movie that I think is tracking well enough to where $1 billion internationally is still on the table. Domestically, though, I don't think it's performing nearly as well. We'll go ahead and put this up because we like to do things live and we like to always create some comparison charts because I think it is one of the best things for us to be able to do. So let's put this up against some of the other films from this year. Let's do Doctor Strange because that was obviously one of the higher grossing films from this year, and let's adjust this for inflation. So at the same point of release, right, Avatar: Way of Water, $253 million. Right now, it is still, again, adjusted for inflation, pacing behind the original Avatar movie. So this is something just to keep in mind. It's not pacing that far behind it, but the first Avatar film did indeed have a lot of legs. Remember that the first film ended around $960 million when all was said and done when you adjust for inflation back in 2009. So do I think that this film is going to have those same kind of legs? I personally don't. It's not tracking as far behind as it probably could be at this point. So some are probably going to point that out saying, hey, it seems to be keeping up. The big question is, what is tomorrow's numbers going to look like in comparison? And what is the next week's numbers going to look like? And what is that third week especially going to look like? Because essentially you see, right, 19.5, 15, 21. Is it going to be able to match the 30 to 31 million, 21 million of that third weekend? I don't know, right? These films came out around the same time, right around that Christmas time. Obviously, that first Avatar film hit Christmas a little bit differently than this one. Still, I don't know if it's going to have that kind of energy in it, even with the storm having passed and Christmas being passed as well. If you compare this film to where it was when Top Gun Maverick was coming out, as you can see, Top Gun Maverick had very, very strong legs because the word of mouth on this film was so incredibly strong that it propelled this film to being one of the highest grossing films domestically of the year. As you see, $718.7 million. I just do not see Avatar: Way of Water beating Top Gun Maverick in that sphere. I do see it, however, as you can see, very much already on pace to be able to easily pass up Top Gun Maverick's international, which is the reason why I think $1 billion internationally for Avatar: Way of Water is very much on the table. When you look at, again, same point of release, I just don't think the domestic numbers are going to be nearly as strong. The film likely will be able to surpass that of Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. I don't think that the film is going to get also, obviously if it's not going to get Top Gun Maverick levels, I can't see it getting to Spider-Man No Way Home levels. It will definitely be able to pass up Doctor Strange, so it'll still be one of the best performing domestic movies of the year, but it's not going to be the number one. I just still think Top Gun Maverick will hold on to that. But we, of course, will continue to watch that here on the channel. At the same point of release, Wakanda Forever was doing a little bit better. Spider-Man No Way Home obviously was just destroying everything. And remember, this is around the same time of year back in 2021. So this also shows you just how very different the market is. That was still during the midst of all the, the COVID discussions, right? Remember that the week before, so this movie came out, Spider-Man No Way Home, the talk was all blaming COVID for why films were failing, including the remake that no one asked for of West Side Story. This film came out, blew the box office out of the water, and then all of a sudden COVID was gone, and they were coming up with every single excuse possible for all the other films that were not making money. Basically, it comes down to this. People are going to see movies that they want to go see. Because everything costs a lot more now, especially compared to back even during the time of the first Avatar film, people are much more careful with their money. So when they hear about a film like Top Gun Maverick, which is getting universal praise for a lot of different things and from a lot of different people, and not really a whole lot of hate, you can see why those numbers did just so much better than the first Avatar and even the second Avatar movie. When you look, and at least at the same point of its release, when you look to Avatar Way of Water, there is definitely, I think that some people, if you're going to be honest, there are, again, mixed reactions. There are people who absolutely hate this movie. There are people who absolutely love this movie. You don't really have that same type of, just, again, polarization. And I think that if you're going to be honest with yourself, Avatar Way of Water is a polarizing movie. Top Gun Maverick, not really that much of a polarizing film by any means. And that's why I think the domestic numbers are going to probably reflect out Maverick being a stronger performer overall. But we're going to continue to track this film, especially comparing it to the original film and also to some of these other films. As I said, I think Avatar Way of Water will probably slow down a little bit more than what we saw from Avatar, Top Gun Maverick. I think it might be able to catch up to films like Black Panther pretty easily and Doctor Strange pretty easily. I could see the film doing $500 million or so domestically, but of course we will wait and see what those numbers look like as the days continue to go by. Posted Moves worldwide total $49.9 million. Again, not a terrible start, but with a higher budget, especially a film here coming from the makers and coming from the world of Shrek. We'll have to wait and see. Sometimes these films can end up doing a lot better holiday-wise because it's one of the only kids' movies out, so that very well could help propel it, especially since the reviews don't seem to be doing too terribly for it. Whitney Houston, I Want to Dance with Somebody. I don't really know exactly who this movie is necessarily for, but hey, it is there. Babylon, again, Oscar bait is pretty much what this film seems to be. $3.5 million domestically, not looking all that great. Violent Night has made its money back and is now making some profit. I think it's a terrible movie, but hey, gotta still give it credit for making its money back. Black Panther Wakanda Forever, again, according to this chart, $799.4 million. Box Office Mojo had it up around 801. So you're looking at this film still essentially making $800 million. By tomorrow, at the very least, the film will have crossed $800 million. So that $800 to $850 million very much is there. And anyone who was saying that was not going to happen, again, I can be right when it comes to these projections. And obviously there are times when I can be wrong, but when it came to this one, I think that I'm pretty much on the money there. And again, it's because this international is doing much better than I thought it would be. I thought that the discrepancy between domestic and international would be a lot bigger, but clearly the domestic market is not showing up for even films like this. I ultimately believe, though, it's because, hey, when you don't have an actual Black Panther in a film called Black Panther, that is going to have a major impact. The Menu, $62.4 million. I wish this film was doing a little bit better. It is pretty much on its way out of theaters. I can't wait to personally pick this film up on physical media. It would be great for this film to get a 4K release, but obviously it doesn't seem like the kind of movie that would necessarily get a 4K release, but there is just a lot of good things happening in this movie. I think they do a very good job, and I think it ultimately comes down to Ralph Fiennes, Anya Taylor-Joy, Nicholas Hoult doing a having phenomenal performances, beautiful cinematography, a really compelling, great, thrilling horror story as well, and goes in directions that I think a lot of people may not necessarily see coming. Strange World continues to be a massive flop for Disney, already on Disney+. So the fact that this film already on streaming services means it's essentially done, so well over $200 million loss for that. And then The Fabelmans exist, but I don't know who that film really is existing for. Let's go ahead and go to the box office charting because we like to do charting here on OMB Reviews. And so with those numbers of $855 million for Avatar Way of the Water, again, anyone trying to talk about the box office mojo numbers, I plug those numbers in on the other chart down here. So if you want to see what that would look like, you can check that one out. It basically doesn't change it all that much, though. Right now, the range I have for Avatar Way of the Water is that the film will make somewhere between $1.2 and $1.7 billion by the end of its run. So this is still very much within the range that I initially had. I thought the film likely how it was pacing could get to $1.5 to $2 billion. But as you can see, according to the charting, right now it looks like that $2 billion is probably off the table. So if you are to believe James Cameron's numbers, that means that this film will end up being a financial loss, right? He says the film needs to make around $2 billion to make its money back. Now, that's what James Cameron says. I think he's bloviating there. I think he's kind of just, speaking out of turn. I think he's just trying to, be a little bit pompous with his numbers. Because based off the actual numbers that we're being given, as far as what's being reported, not just by the industry, but also by Disney, and again, in a way to where if it was not being true, it could cause some legal problems. So that's why you end up trusting numbers like that. This movie cost somewhere, again, between $350 million and $460 million. So if you take the average of that, that gets to be around $400 million or so. I'll, of course, crack those numbers a little bit more, because that $460 million is a little bit of a newer number that came out. But based off of that and based off of those metrics, I think the film needs to make probably closer to $1 billion, maybe $1.2 billion, depending on the budget for the actual film, the actual budget. So in either situation, though, a very high number for it to start making its money back. And so I'm projecting the film, based off of the $400 million budget, to make somewhere between $133 million and $426 million back. So you could see a pretty good return on investment. But obviously, when you look at this movie and you think, okay, if they're putting $460 million in and they're getting that lower end back, probably not the best return on investment. And then if you look at the budget and you think of it as being potentially higher than that $400 million, where they need to make maybe $1.2 billion back, well, then you're looking at a film making somewhere between $500 and maybe $300 million in net gain profits. And in that situation, yeah, that's just not very good, especially when you compare that to the numbers made by the first film and also some of the other massive numbers that we've seen from the other big successful films that have come out so far this year. Right now, the film is $86 million in the red, but I think that will probably be wiped out by the end of next weekend, as I do suspect this film will cross $1 billion, and that's what I currently have for the break even for this film. Looking at some of the other films, right, with Whitney Houston's film at $7.9 million, the budget I have for that is $45 million, $78 million being reported for Babylon. I think that's an average of what was being reported. Same thing here with the $85 million for Puss in Boots. So the break evens for those are $212 and $195 million respectively. That means right now, as of the recording of this video, Babylon's looking at being $100 million in the red. Puss in Boots is being $97 million in the red. So we'll have to wait for their second weekend numbers, of course, to see exactly where this film will stand. But not a very strong start, I would say, for especially the Whitney Houston movie and the Babylon film. But Puss in Boots, again, not the best start in the world, but definitely not out of the game completely with this week coming up, where most people will still be off from work and school, or at least a large portion will be off from those locations. Violent Night, as I've mentioned, has made its money back at $7.3 million, even though the film is terrible. Strange World, the fact that they pulled it out from theaters, $234 million in the red. So right now, this film has a potential of actually being worse performing. As I said, sometimes my charting is off by a little bit. Sometimes films can perform a little bit worse. Sometimes films can actually perform so much better, right? So my projection is somewhere between that 50 and 70% number. This 30% number means that La La Crocodile well exceeded expectations that I had for the movie. So that does indeed happen, right? That can absolutely happen. But as you can see, hopefully, the trend here is that most of these movies fall somewhere between that 50 and 70% number, right? So again, this is something where I've been tracking these movies for a long time. I've been doing this for a very, very long time. And I can tell you that when you look at all of these numbers averaged together, it's roughly 60%. So the numbers themselves show that, again, the ranges that I give are usually pretty accurate. And obviously there is a large range there, but it really depends on legs, right? Can a film double its money after the first 2 weeks of release, having very strong legs, or even better? Or does a film kind of fall off, right? And 70% of its first 70% rather of its entire box office is the first 2 weeks of its release. It's really hard to say. I think Avatar, as I said, I do think Avatar, obviously the first 2 weeks, that's why that's at 100%. This film will end up being a pretty good performer. But I think it's going to make the vast majority of its film up front early. And so I think that the film probably will end in that 60 to 70% range, which is why that 1.2 or, that 1.2 to $1.5 billion is a very likely number. So let's just say right now, there is a situation where Top Gun Maverick can still edge out this movie and be the highest grossing film of 2022, which would, of course, make me incredibly happy. The one other thing to note, though, is even if you do see Avatar: Way of Water getting to that $1.7 billion, right, that high end of my range, right, that's still about $400 million in the black, right? $400 million of profit. That's not going to come anywhere close to Top Gun Maverick. Again, well exceeding my expectations and the projections at $638 million in net gain profits. And actually being more so in line with films like Minions, Rise of Gru, a little bit over Jurassic World Dominion, and some of the other films to come out this year that were big box office successes. But as you can see, a lot more flops, a lot more films in the red here than in the black. And the big question, of course, is going to be, is it going to be enough to make up for the massive losses that Disney has seen this year? I mean, you look at that $234 million for Strange World alone. You then add on top of that movies like, the Lightyear film, $100 million of a loss there. Some of the other films that they are releasing, again, they still have, apparently, according to recent releases, they still do have some of the debts from that deal that they made with Fox, right? Obviously, it was a huge purchase for one, but apparently the debts were a part of that. So my guess would be that would be them on, basically footing the bill for the expenses of the films that they had already put in the process of making. But for films like Avatar, where you're adding even more money on top of what was already spent, it puts even more onus on them to try to have those films be as successful as possible. But right now, Avatar: Way of Water, there's no taking away the fact that the film is still doing well as far as just a general film is concerned, but will it be able to reach the $2 billion that James Cameron says the film has to reach to break even? I don't think that's really on the table at this point, at least according to the charting that I have. And as you saw, right, people might disagree with my break-even point, right? I'm sure there'll be a lot of people in the chat saying, well, I think this and I think that about the break-even. But when it comes to my projections, as you saw just from those numbers, my projections tend to be pretty spot on. So that 1.2 to 1.7 after the first 2 weeks of release, likely going to be where this film ends up. Could it underperform? Could it overperform? Absolutely. $1 billion is absolutely going to be something that this film reaches, and I would say probably even by next weekend. The question is, how over $1 billion does this film get? That is, of course, anyone's guess, and we will continue to track that here on OMB Reviews. And, of course, you can check out my website, ombreviews.com, to continue tracking this film as I update the charts periodically over the course of the next few weeks. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Do you think Avatar: Way of Water is going to be able to do better than my tracking? Do you think the film has a chance of doing $2 billion? I don't think it really does at this point, based off of what I am seeing. I'm definitely seeing the film having that potential to get to $1 billion $1 billion internationally, but it's really, I think, struggling domestically to be able to keep up with some of the other films to come out this year. So it'll be interesting to see what the end domestic number is for Avatar: Way of Water, where it is absolutely struggling. Also, any thoughts on the newest films like Puss in Boots or the Whitney Houston film or Babylon? Let me know your thoughts about that and anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, that fire button, honestly, and smash the rumble button. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Again, have a very merry and blessed Christmas. Remember that there are the 12 days of Christmas, right? It's not just the one single day. So say Merry Christmas for the next 12 days, right? Continue to do so up until the Feast of the Epiphany, where we will then enter into the season of Epiphany and the time after Epiphany as well. And that, of course, will eventually lead us all the way up until Ash Wednesday in the beginning of the season of Lent. So again, thank you all very much for your time. And again, I hope you had a very, very merry and blessed Christmas. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my December Patreon, Subscribestar, and Locals members, the long-awaited December video. First off, shout out to my Patreon members, Father Luca Illick, Garrett Searles, Heimir Irie Hymason, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, who you can check out over on his YouTube channel, Jonathan Carney, Laura, the Modern Major General Story, Orange Hour Reviews, who also has a YouTube channel you can check out at the same name, Rosetta Allen, who has a YouTube channel known as Eagle Rider, Miss Martin Muses, who also has a YouTube channel by the same name, Chris from the 80s, who you can also find on YouTube by the same name, and of course the Empress of the Universe, Tina B, who you can check out on her YouTube channel, Tina B. She does a show with the other Valkyrie of this channel, Stephanie B, called Soup to Nuts, so go ahead and check that out if you are interested. It's a very fun time talking about movies and all kinds of movie history as well. Also, shout out to my Subscribestar peeps, Matt317, who you can check out over on his Twitch channel by the same name, The R, Fast Reaction, Mr. Roy, Jane Mira, the Beer Guru, and the K-Man, who you can check out on Twitter, but also on his website, xtheboundaries.co, to check out his latest music musings, as well as his upcoming podcast as well. Also, to my locals members, Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, How About a Hockey Player, UAB Mad Dog, Mike Jackson for the win, J.H. Schwalbach, Brett D90, and the amazing lawyer, Robert Barnes. Thank you very much for being my supporters over on Locals. If you want your name shouted out at the end of every video and live stream, please check out the top link in the video description below, where you can sign up to get access to not only vocal shoutouts, but also to giveaways of Blu-rays, 4Ks, and Blu-ray sets as well. Right now, I'm giving away things like Nobody on 4K. I just got a bunch of ones in last night. Shawshank Redemption on 4K last night, in Soho on 4K. Some steelbooks of the Godfather trilogy on 4K as well. Tons of stuff to do for giveaways, so check out, again, that top link to find out how to sign up to become a Keep It the Bifrost level or above to get access to that, as well as things like the Chosen of Valhalla monthly member stream, and also other goodies like the podcast that I do with John the Flick Pig Flickinger, which we'll be recording our episode for this month in the next day or two. So be on the lookout for that if you are a member of the Army of Asgard level and above. Thank you all very much for your time and attention. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your December. And as always, God bless.